Mr. President, on February 25th, 1 year ago, award-winning Chicago chef Tony Priolo woke up early to work out on his elliptical machine. He turned on his TV and he couldn't believe what he was seeing. Bombs, gunfire, convoys of armored vehicles. Russia's war on Ukraine had begun. Chef Priolo thought of a young Ukrainian woman who had worked for a summer in one of his restaurants, and he started wondering whether she and her family were safe. He asked himself, what can I do? And then he had an idea. He contacted the Illinois Restaurant Association and 30 of his closest chef friends in the area and said, let's use our talents to feed people and to feed the people of Ukraine who've been forced from their homes by this terrible war. Less than 3 weeks later, chefs representing 70 restaurants around Chicago dished out meals to a crowd of 2,000 people at an event called Chicago Chefs Cook for Ukraine. They sold out a rather large venue known as Navy Pier in Chicago. They raised $650,000 in that one night and another $200,000 after. They donated all of it to the World Central Kitchen, the nonprofit organization founded by chef and noted humanitarian Jose Andres. I had a chance to meet Chef Andres just a few weeks before the start of the war in Ukraine. I love that man. He's always so full of ideas and hope and determination. The chef came to America from Spain when he was 21 years old with nothing but a set of knives and $50. He's now an American citizen with an empire of award-winning restaurants. Through his work with World Central Kitchen, which he founded in 2010, Jose Andres also has earned a reputation as the world's leading, quote, first responder for food, close quote. Wherever disaster strikes, it seems the World Central Kitchen is there to feed hungry and displaced people, usually within 24 hours. For Chef Tony Priolo in Chicago, it wasn't enough, though, simply to raise money for the World Central Kitchen, as noble as that effort is. After the success of Chicago Cooks for Ukraine, Tony tracked down his former employee on Instagram and asked, "Are you okay?" She replied, "Not really. My mom and dog and I are hiding in the subway in Ukraine." So Tony decided he had to go to Ukraine himself, personally, and help. 2 other star chefs from Chicago, Giuseppe Tintori and Paul Kahn, decided to join him. When one of Tony's regular customers heard that the chefs were paying for the trip to the Poland and Ukraine out of their pocket, he said, "I have 5 million frequent flyer miles. I'll buy your tickets." They volunteered for a week last April, cooking from early morning to late at night, feeding hot meals to as many as 30,000 people a day at a Polish refugee camp just 6 miles from the border. Helping others was not new to Tony. He's known for his support of charity, including Meals on Wheels in Chicago, St. Jude's Hospital, and the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation. But what Tony saw in that refugee camp near the Polish-Ukrainian border broke his heart. An elderly couple appeared to have left everything they owned behind, now dependent on the kindness of strangers for even a simple glass of water and a meal. Terrified women and children who had been forced to flee their homes, carrying only what they could fit into suitcases and shopping bags. Often Tony said, "I had to look away to hide the tears." For his humanitarian work to aid Ukrainians displaced by war and his many other charitable endeavors, Chef Priolo was recently honored by Chicago Magazine as a Chicagoan of the Year, a well-deserved tribute. Around the same time that Chef Priolo was watching the horrors unfold last year, Senator Chris Coons of Delaware and I sat in a dark, nearly empty departure lounge in Vilnius, Lithuania, early one morning. We were there to express support for Lithuania, that small NATO member on the front line of democracy, who has a long history of Russian tyranny. And then while we sat, the unthinkable occurred in modern Europe. News broke that Russian dictator Vladimir Putin had launched a massive military invasion of Ukraine. It was an ill-fated throwback to the era when aggressor nations tried to seize their neighbor's territory by force, all in a blind pursuit of some warped Soviet nostalgia trip. Putin was willing to sacrifice the lives of thousands of Ukrainians and even Russians, the reputation of his country, and the international order established after the horror of World War II. Perhaps having listened to too many years of his own country's brainwashing propaganda, Putin also thought Ukraine would just fall into his lap in a matter of days or hours. He thought the transatlantic alliance and the community of democracies were this thing of the past and wouldn't dare respond. Well, he was wrong on every single front. The Ukrainian people repelled Putin's invasion. They heroically clawed back seized territory. They withstood brutal, deliberate attacks on civilian targets and critical infrastructure, war crimes by any standard of human conduct. They are united in their resistance to Russia and their desire to be free to choose their own path in the future. The United States and its allies around the world have stood together in support of Ukraine and against Russia. And NATO is on the cusp of adding 2 new formidable members, Finland and Sweden. President Biden deserves great praise for leading this global effort, and praise too to the American people for recognizing a courageous effort against tyranny and standing on the right side of history. But we should not lose sight of the crimes committed by Putin in the war, crimes for which he and his enablers must and will be held accountable. Entire villages have been destroyed. From Bucha to Izium to Kherson, there is evidence of horrific mass killing, torture, sexual violence against innocent people. Dead and mutilated bodies litter the street. Babies have been found in mass graves. Thousands have been abducted. These are the acts of a war criminal. That is why Congress recently strengthened our nation's tools for cooperation with the International Criminal Court when it comes to Ukraine. Why we recently enacted a bill I introduced entitled Justice for Victims of War Crimes. And it's why Congress provided $45 billion in aid to Ukraine in the most recent spending bill, a measure, thank goodness, with broad bipartisan support. Just like the Nuremberg trials after World War II, and more recently the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, the world will hold Putin and the Russians accountable for unleashing war crimes and crimes against humanity in Ukraine. As President Biden said in his State of the Union address, the fight against tyranny in Ukraine is, quote, a test for the ages, a test for America, and a test for the world. We cannot fail. I agree with the President. We must continue to stand loyally by Ukraine. I'll close with a memory I'll never forget. It was the year 2014, 9 years ago. I was walking through Kiev's Maidan Square with my friend, the late Senator John McCain. It was a trip we made to the area, and he was a celebrity. John McCain stood by their side when others wouldn't. They loved him for it. And we started to walk into Maidan Square together. All around us were makeshift shrines dedicated to the victims killed during peaceful protests, simply asking for the opportunity to have a democracy. It was evident then, and reflective of what we've seen during the last year in Ukraine, the unshakable determination of the Ukrainian people to be free, to be able to democratically choose their own future, just as we do in the United States. Senator McCain understood it, and I stood by his side. It is long overdue that President Putin understands it as well. Until then, we will stand together with the Ukrainian people in that journey toward democracy. Mr. President, I yield the floor.